All right, Robbie, thanks for coming on the hub.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Matt.
I've been looking forward to this episode when we talk about, startups, entrepreneurship, anything related really to entrepreneurship. Those are some of my best episodes. People really like them, so I'm glad we finally were able to make this happen.
Yeah, it'll be good. Hopefully, I'm no expert, but have a few things to share that might be interesting or helpful to other people. So it's good to be on here.
Yep. Well, before we get into the weeds of your quasi search fund here and what you're doing, can you talk to us a little bit about risk and reward, mainly in the sense of poker, how you manage risk? For those that don't know, Robbie is the one who taught me when to fold, when to bet big, when to bully people off the table, and how to play the game of poker. So I've heard
Yeah,
A7, you always fold on A7. So can you give us a little background?
sure. Yeah, I'm no poker expert, but I have played a little bit. I started playing with roommates in college and then friends at work, and I do enjoy the game, but it's also just a great way to hang out with friends and everything, spend some time together, and have some friendly competition, which I am very competitive, so I always like. But yeah, normally I just play like with friends and at little home games, just for fun. But there's been a couple of times, maybe three or four, where I've been to Las Vegas for work, where I put some actual real money on the table. And one time I was thinking I was playing real well, was getting a little bit arrogant, and I had an ace seven. And for those of you who know, it's an okay hand. It's pretty good. Aces are good, and um, essentially on the turn, which is the fourth card that comes out, I had a full house, aces, full of sevens,
Oh,
and I bet a lot of money. I had the best hand. I think I pretty much went all in, and the other guy called me, and he rivered a better full house. He also had an ace, and I think it was an ace queen. And so I somewhat slow played it because I thought I was being sneaky, and lost. It wasn't like an insane amount of money, but the most money I've ever lost in poker was on that hand. And then next time I went to Vegas, I played again and also lost a good amount of money on A7. So that's twice that I've lost some decent money on A7. And now if I'm ever playing for real money, I just know I got to fold with A7. It's just a bad hand for me.
it's it's a great story. Yeah, a great story. A good way to show that sometimes you might be doing everything right. Because I'm sure, I mean, you won it on the river, right? Until that last turn, you were
Yeah.
winning. So
Yeah. And, I do like poker just because there's a lot of really good elements to the game, a lot of strategy. It is a social game at times if you're playing with your friends. Um, but you can look back and, like you said, take some good lessons about risk and reward, and realize that sometimes you just get lucky. You can play things exactly right, um, or unlucky too. On the flip side, you can play things exactly right, and someone else can just get really lucky. And that's the same way it goes in life and business too, where sometimes you look at people who've become really successful, and there's some hard work and some good ideas there too, but sometimes it's just good luck and timing that kind of makes them successful. So it's a good game for sure.
it's a fun one, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about what you're currently doing. You're kind
Sure.
of doing a little bit of a quasi search fund, a little bit is the way I kind of think about it. Maybe for our listeners, you can describe what a search fund is and then what you're doing and how it kind of is similar and how it's maybe a little different.
Yeah. So a search fund is a form of entrepreneurship where you essentially um, raise some money from a group of investors. Usually there's, just to keep it simple, we'll say there's 10 different slots or 10 different investors. And let's say, you're saying, hey, I'm going to raise $500,000 for my search. And you're raising that money to pay for about 2 years or so of time for you to look for a business to buy, legal fees, marketing stuff, travel expenses, due diligence, and everything that it takes to everything that it costs to look for businesses to buy. So you're basically reaching out to these investors before you have an idea or before you have a specific business to buy, but you do have an idea of a general industry, investment thesis, things like that, of saying, hey, I'm going to go into these industries because of X, Y, and Z reasons. And I have, expertise or experience in these industries. And I think, I'm a good investment because, whatever you say. So you kind of sell yourself to these investors and you say, hey, if you want to take up one of my spots, it's $50,000. I'm raising a $500,000 fund. That'll get me to this stage. And these are the types of businesses I'm going to look at buying. Then what happens next is you go look for a bunch of businesses, you source a lot of deals. Ideally, eventually you find a business to buy. And then at that point, you go back to your investors and you say, hey, this is the business that I'm going to buy at these terms. Do you guys want to put in more money to help me buy the business? And they get some preferred terms on that for being one of the early investors. And usually, you combine some of your investor, capital with the bank capital, and then seller financing is usually a part of it as well. So it's not all investor, purchased. You're using some leverage as well. And then once you raise the funds from either your current investors, or you can get outside money as well to get the deal done, you as the searcher would then come in and run the business as the CEO, with the idea being that, obviously you want to grow it through either expanding the revenue operations and sales, or improving your margins and increasing your profitability, or obviously both, right? And so by doing both of those things, you do that for 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 years, then you have some sort of exit and the investors get their return. You come in as an entrepreneur with typically it's 15 to maybe 25% equity as the search fund or as the searcher. And so if you have a successful, 10-year operating the business, then you get whatever that equity turns out to be upon an exit as well. So there's some upside. And, it's a really interesting business model because, for me, I really like the idea of entrepreneurship. I tried starting a few different things on my own, and it just, it wasn't really for me.
Yep.
Some people are really good at taking a business from 0 to 1. And I think other people are really good at kind of taking a business from 1 to, 2 or 10 or whatever. And I think that's more in line with my skill set. And so there's different ways you can go about buying a business, whether it's through SBA or, friends and family or whatever, but getting the search fund partners and their experience and their network, and kind of having them be advisors as well as, obviously investors, for me was really interesting. And I felt like that was helpful to me as I would go down my path of entrepreneurship. So it was, that's basically what a search fund is and maybe why people would do it. Let's see, what other questions can I answer on a search fund in general?
Oh, there's a lot to unpack there. I guess one thing I was thinking as you were talking was it seems like there's a couple of real benefits. Like, you're not constrained in the business that you buy. I mean, you're still constrained, but you're not constrained in the business that you buy, in the sense that if it's, a $10 million business, $5 million business, whatever the case might be, that might be really hard to come up with that financing yourself, or to do an SBA, or to do it without having a search fund or investors backing you. So it kind of, I guess what I'm trying to say, it opens up a little bit more possibilities when you have when you have investors backing you, that you could maybe tackle a bigger business to buy or a bigger business to run.
For sure. Yeah, it's kind of, I think some of your past podcast episodes, people have at least talked a little bit about the SBA or their experience with it. But in a nutshell, you can get up to $5 million of SBA financing for pretty cheap. And that's a pretty good loan, but it kind of caps your, you know, yeah, it constrains what you can get or what you can buy to, you know, obviously you could get other investors as well outside of the SBA if you wanted to buy a business that was maybe $8 million. Or if you had cash, you could put in the difference or have the seller finance some themselves as well. But with the search fund, it kind of takes you to that next tier where typically the business deals that I was looking at were, I was kind of saying, you know, we'll probably buy something between 10 million and maybe 30 or 40 million dollars. And that will be between 1 and, you know, maybe 3 to 5 million in EBITDA, something like that. I was really focusing on the 1 to 2, maybe $2.5 million range. So it'd probably be on the lower side, but was open to looking at other deals as well. And what's interesting about that is that, you know, it's bigger than just the standard typical individual person would be purchasing, you know, some local whoever that's wanting to buy a business. Right. But it's smaller than what a typical private equity firm would be interested in looking at because they have too much more capital to deploy than what a $20 million purchase would be worth their time. So this kind of bridges the gap there and is a way for some of these investors to more or less outsource their sourcing of deals to just an individual. So, you know, private equity firms, they'll have, you know, a team of people that's looking at deals and doing diligence and they pay their salaries and bonuses and all of that. And that's a great way to do it as well. But this is a way to get, you know, in the game as well, get some good returns, but with less risk and less overhead from their perspective, because they're just committing, you know, maybe $50,000 up front, you know, and then seeing what happens later. So it's an interesting space. It's relatively new within the last 15 years or so, 15, 20 years, but it's really gained a lot more traction in the last 5 years or so. So yeah.
I think it's interesting that it has grown in popularity. I think as more people, baby boomers, retire, sell off their businesses, there's a lot of opportunity here for people to, you know, buy their business. A lot of times these people that are retiring, family doesn't want to run the business or they're looking for an exit, right? A lot of the wealth is tied up in this business, and this seems like a good way for transactions to happen in the marketplace. Like you said, they're too small for private equity to go after. They got to get a better return. They need to deploy more capital than these businesses are worth, but it's almost too big for just an individual investor. And so there's kind of a sweet spot for these search funds to come in.
Right.
The question I had was, how did you find investors that were willing to take a chance on you? Was it just personal connection? Was there someone who introduced you, or how did that work? And then if you're okay to share, how did you pitch? Because you're right, you're kind of selling yourself saying, look, I'm an expert in XYZ. I've been in this industry for a while, and here's kind of why I think I'm going to succeed. I just need a little backing, a little bit of support in order to get there.
Yeah, sure. So I basically heard of the search fund concept during my time at the MBA at BYU, which is where we met, where I took a class called entrepreneurship through acquisition.
Where you taught me poker.
Yeah. Yeah.
We were in Vegas and we were supposed to be at a conference and someone stayed up all night. No.
Yeah. And so, you know, I heard about it there, and I always thought that I would go, you know, work at some consulting firm or some other company, get some experience, and then in 3, 4, or 5 years down the road, you know, save up some money and then buy or start, you know, something later on the side. So that was kind of always my plan. But when I took this class, which is my first time hearing about the search fund concept, I just couldn't stop thinking about it. I thought it was like the perfect thing for me. And so I reached out to, I guess, but the problem for me was that at BYU, there isn't really like a traditional search fund path where they, funnel people through the search fund channel. It's kind of like people at Stanford and, a couple of the other, maybe 3 or 4 of the other top schools. They have a pretty good program for that, but BYU doesn't quite have that yet. I think someday they will, but not yet. At least at the time when I was there. And so I basically just started reaching out to people who had tried to do a search fund in the past, whether it was through people I knew in my personal LinkedIn network or people who, I'd heard about had done it, past BYU, alum from whatever, people who'd done it on their own. And I had a list of like 7 people that initially I was like, okay, they've either invested in search funds or they've done one, or they, some sort of relation to a search fund. So I called those people and just kind of told them like, hey, I'm looking at doing a search fund. What do you know about it? What do you recommend I do to learn more about it? What are the pros and cons? What should I be thinking about? Just all the questions, because at that stage it was, hey, it sounds like a good thing, but like, I don't really know. And it's a big commitment, right? Because you're kind of saying, hey, I'm going to commit to this for potentially 8 or 10 years of my career.
Right.
And so at that stage, it was just trying to learn as much as I could about it. And I tried to talk to people who had done a search, people who had invested in searchers, people who were doing a search right now, as well as people who had done a search, but they weren't successful in it. They either didn't find a company or they found a company that didn't go well. So I tried to talk to all those different people. And each time I talked to somebody, I asked them if there was someone else that they could put me in touch with. And the search community is a really tight, they're a really tight group. It's not a huge community. And once you kind of talk to the right people, they kind of all know everybody.
Yep.
And so over the course of a couple of months, I had actually talked to, I think it was about 50 people, between investors, searchers, whoever. And just the more I talked to people, the more excited I got, and just felt like, hey, I can do this. And, eventually, when I decided to do it, I had to kind of change my conversations from, hey, I'm thinking about doing this and, I'm learning about it, to like, okay, I'm doing it and here's how I'm doing it. And so I called a lot of those investors back. I had maybe 8 or 10 from that first round of just introductory calls. I called them back. At this point, it was maybe 2 or 3 months later. And I had said, hey, I've made my decision to do this. I'm raising a fund. I'm targeting B2B businesses or kind of healthcare services, healthcare businesses. And here's, my experience in those areas. Here's kind of why I think I'm going to be successful there. And this was in March of 2020 when I was having these conversations. And so I actually got an official commitment from one investor, as well as some other commitments that kind of said like, hey, we're probably in, we'll take 2 spots if you get this many other people or whatever.
Right.
So I was feeling pretty good about it. And then, March 2020 was when COVID was just starting. Right. And so as conversations went on, they basically were saying, hey, we like you, but we're not really investing in any new searchers for at least, some people were saying a year or 3 months or 6 months or whatever, because they were saying they might need their capital to reserve that for current portfolio companies to help them weather potential storms that would be faced through COVID, which, totally makes sense. But, for me, I was graduating in a month and didn't have a job. And now it looks like maybe I wouldn't be able to raise the search fund I was trying to do. So I was in a little bit of a pickle. But I was introduced to somebody, kind of a BYU alumni from 2010, who had kind of done a self-funded search, which is basically saying like, hey, I'm going to fund the search myself, the search portion, and then I'll bring a deal to either investors at the point of time when I have one and they can invest if they want, or I'll just fund it myself to the SBA or friends and family or whatever. So somebody that had kind of done that and then grown his business over the last 10 years into, something pretty good. And essentially was just going to go to him and see if he wanted to be in my investor pool. And long story short, he basically said, well, we have back searchers in the past, but usually it's just, ourselves. We don't really like partnering with other investors because we have our own investment, philosophy and thesis and all that. And then talking about what that was compared to the traditional model, I just really liked what they did, and ended up partnering with him and his group as opposed to just 10 or 15 different investors,
Right.
Committed to just that one group. And that's eventually where I ended up, was partnering with them on the search.
I like.
So I don't know if that answered. I feel like I kind of went on a little bit of a tangent there, but that's kind of the story. And feel free to ask any follow-up questions there if things I missed.
No, it was great. I liked how you described the process, because I think you laid out, as you were talking with all these people, you were describing how you got educated, how you did kind of your due diligence to make sure that, hey, this was actually something that I could see myself doing, and there's a real high chance of success. It's not just I heard about this cool new thing in school, and yeah, it sounds really
Yeah.
interesting. Like, you put forth the work, you did your due diligence by talking to all these people, kind of going through the process, and as you did that, you found your way forward.
Yeah. And there's two quick things I'll mention that were interesting pieces of advice I got along the way of those conversations. Actually, one other thing I want to mention too is that in the search fund community, there's traditional model that I mentioned, but there's also, for people who are interested, there's also search fund incubators, where it's, you partner with, you go basically work for them, they pay you a salary, they basically fund the search for you, and then they connect you with investors later. So I was also talking to some of those people. There's maybe 3 or 4 or 5 of those that are kind of search fund incubators, and that's a really interesting path as well that I was pursuing. So that's also out there. But there was 2 interesting things. Just if anyone's out there thinking like, oh, this sounds cool, like, like a no-brainer, because that's what I thought when I'm like, hey, I can have 20% ownership in a business and get paid while I search and not use any of my own money to buy it. And I don't, like, there's no downside, right? Well, there is some downside, because number one, a third of the people who do a search fund don't ever find a business to buy. So you're potentially spending 2 or 3 years, of your career with no eventual company to buy. I think there's still a lot of good lessons and skills that you learn along the way, but that's a long time to not have any company at the end, and then a third of the people, even though they do find a business to buy, they either don't make a return for themselves, or they end up, losing money, or it's not anything that's, it's not a substantial return. And then there's about a third of the people who have, a 3, 4, 5x return or more on the investor's money, and then they get a good payday, on that as well. So it's about a third of the people are successful, a third kind of are okay, and a third are unsuccessful. So there's that too. And then the other thing that a lot of people told me that I think is very true, that a lot of people don't think about, is if you're married, like, this has to be a spouse decision, like a family decision, because the search process is really hard. It can be really lonely. There's a lot of ups and downs, in entrepreneurship in general, that it has to be a family decision, and your spouse has to be somebody who can kind of handle those ups and downs and take off some of this, take things on that you might not be able to contribute for a time to the family. And, it's definitely a family decision, I guess, is my point. And so have those discussions with your spouse or your kids or your family or whatever, before you decide just to do it, because it is a full family commitment.
Yeah. You're not just doing this alone, because the business that you might find that you want to buy could be in Texas, Virginia, Oregon.
Yeah.
And it might be in a very different place. And so
yeah,
you got to make sure everyone's on board.
But yeah, so anyway, I kind of wanted just to share those things. And then, was there a question you asked, I feel like, that I was supposed to answer?
I forget what it was, so it must not have been super important.
I think you did ask one, but I don't. I apologize. I don't remember what it was.
I actually think you answered it because I was wondering how you, once you found the searchers, how you pitched yourself, how you sold yourself. And I think you kind of
Yeah,
answered in the sense of, well, you had these conversations with them, they got to know you, they were able to do some due diligence on you, you were able to do due diligence on them through the course of these conversations. And it
yeah,
kind of became clear one way or the other that, hey, this is going to work, this is a good partnership, or this isn't going to work.
yeah. And that is the right way to think about it too. Like it is a partnership. Um, if you're doing a search the right way, it's not just money that you're finding from people. You really should view them as partners, and the people who you feel like you connect with the best are going to be your best partners and are going to help you be the most successful. And that's why I decided to pivot from the traditional model to partner with just these guys, is because I felt like we connected really well on a personal level, but also our um, investment kind of philosophy and the way we looked at getting deals done, and kind of our just overall philosophies lined up really, really well. And I think that it would be really frustrating for me to be, to go find a deal that I wanted to do that the investors then said, oh, well, that doesn't line up with what, you said before 2 years ago. So we're not going to invest in that deal. It's like, well, things have changed in the last 2 years, like the market has changed, or I've changed, I've learned a lot more the last 2 years. And
Good point.
the idea of not having to stick to a defined investment thesis and have a little more flexibility with my current partners was really appealing to me. So yeah.
That's a good point. What are you doing now? What industry are you?
Yeah,
And you don't have to share like a ton of specifics, obviously. Share what you're comfortable with, but
sure.
it would be interesting for people to hear what you're doing now and what your strategy is going forward.
Yeah. So my partners, brief background. The other reason why I thought they were great is because they have a couple of different kind of arms to their portfolio, but the main one is a healthcare arm. And I was, as I mentioned before, one of the two things I was looking at was B2B services, and then also healthcare or senior care specifically, because I had previous experience in the funeral industry before my MBA. And so I felt like, hey, I know a lot about this market and I have some experience that if I can leverage that would give me, some sort of advantage on, owning a business, whatever that may be. And so it's like, hey, they have healthcare and specifically senior care, home health, hospice, assisted living centers. And obviously those are not the same thing as funeral homes, but at the time I was like, there's some synergies and some crossover. And so initially when I partnered with them, it wasn't like, hey, you have to do this specific industry. It was more like, hey, let's partner and then we can figure out what makes sense as we find it. And so initially I was doing something different, but about 3 or 4 months in, we ended up taking a pretty good look at the funeral industry specifically and how that fit in with the hospice business that we had, that we being my partners, the assisted living centers, the home health, and all of that. And we felt like, there's a lot of things that we're seeing in those industries that the funeral industry is either also experiencing or we believe will experience. And based on my background in that industry, we felt like, let's go into the funeral industry. Let's commit to doing that. Let's buy funeral homes and essentially centralize the services that we can through, like the accounting and the HR,
Yep.
legal, marketing, website, software. Let's centralize all of those things that can be brought in-house. And let's give the local teams the support they need to operate, the best they can. There's a lot of things in the funeral industry that make those dynamics interesting to like a local funeral team. There are some bigger players in the funeral space that are, sophisticated companies, big corporations, 3 or 4 public companies. And in competitive markets, they are driving down price. It's hard for these independent, family-owned businesses to compete with the sophistication and the, you know, all the software and technology that those firms are using. The individual mom and pop funeral homes aren't able to keep up, and it's driving them out of business. And so what we went into the industry with an intentional intentional strategy of saying, basically, we want to bridge the gap. We want to let the local independent mom and pop shops essentially still operate that way, but give them the support that we can, because we have some of these other businesses in our portfolio. We're already doing some of these central services, so we can offer that to these funeral homes, but then not, we're not going to grow to 1,000 funeral homes or 1,500 or 3,000 or whatever, right? Like, we want to be a small regional player. We want to buy a few funeral homes a year, and really focus. Initially, we're focusing on rural markets where there's, 1 or 2 or 3 funeral homes where we feel like, we don't have to get in too deep too fast, but it's enough to where we can still offer that support and allow these funeral homes to compete and provide the services that they need, even in markets where some of these other competitors are making it difficult for them. So that's kind of the investment thesis. There's some other things that I think we're doing along the way to make it, more robust than that and more interesting. One of the things that makes us unique is we don't have any outside investors. So we're not, when we go to look at a funeral home to buy, it's not, hey, let us buy you, and then, and immediately we have to raise our prices, and then in 3 or 4 years we have to sell to somebody else or whatever, because our investors have their requirements on what they need back. Right. It's just, hey, we're young and we like this industry. We want to be in this for the long term. And, we don't have to raise prices. We probably will at some point down the road, just because to keep up with the economy and everything, you kind of have to eventually. But it's not because of investor pressure. It's because that's just what we have to do. Right. And so that's really interesting to a lot of these sellers, because they don't want to sell to a big corporation. They don't want to sell to investors just to make people more money. They want their family name and their legacy to remain intact. And I think we can do that better than pretty much anybody else out there because of how we've structured things internally.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. You're kind of giving them a little bit more support to compete, just giving them a little bit more juice to run their business and just compete with the big public corporations, basically.
Yeah, and it's not like the big public corporations don't also do some of that, right? It's not like they're not centralizing accounting or using software or whatever. It's just that we're doing it in a way that I think is better for the independent local funeral homes, and in a way that carries on their family name better than those guys are, because that's what we're focusing on, and that's what we are prioritizing kind of in our entire, in our themes and our values. It's people first, the team is first, the family's, legacy or whatever has to be first. And it's not about, making the most money or returning money to investor pockets.
Yeah. There's not a deadline, a sense of, hey, we need to get X return by this date or else we're in trouble. This fund is in danger of collapsing or whatever. There's
right.
That timeline, that deadline is not as present in your model.
Yep. Yeah. So
no, go ahead.
I was just going to give a brief update of where we're at today, but if you had another question or whatever, we can do that too.
No, I'll go ahead and give a brief update. And then I was just going to say, when does the exit happen for you, or what's the timetable?
Yeah. Business. So we started looking at funeral homes about a year ago. We closed on our first funeral home in January of this year. We closed on another one, a few months ago, so kind of during the summer of this year. And we're in the process of closing on 4 more right now. We'll probably close on 2 of those next month, and another one the month after that, and the other one the following month.
Question.
So we'll
Sorry, real question.
yeah.
Are you taking ownerships, like majority ownership stakes in this, or is it a minority stake?
Yeah, good question. So all of these except one of them will be full buyouts.
Okay.
And then the other one will be kind of a partial stake. And so initially, most of the people we're talking to are just looking to retire or do something else. And so we're buying them out. We have talked to a lot of people who are interested in doing more of the partnership model where it's a partial buyout. But they want to see us a little more established first before they kind of take their risk on whatever upside it is that we think we'll have. They kind of want to say, okay, well,
Prove yourself
we're
out.
having a lot of, talk to us in a year or two once you have 5 or 10 funeral homes, and then we'll see what makes sense. So that's kind of our focus right now. Although we do have a great partnership model as well that I think will be really successful down the road. Right now, it's not quite the right timing for that. And then we have offers on several other funeral homes, maybe 4 or 5 others. And we've probably put out 30 offers over the last year. In the beginning, I think a lot of those we weren't super serious. We're just trying to get some reps in. Yeah. See, get our name out there. And so there's probably the first 10 offers out there were offers that we would do, but they weren't, we knew they weren't super real offers either. But now I think, we've kind of fine-tuned the process and really learned a lot from that over the last year. And so, yeah, we're in a really good spot right now. I would say the reception has been better than expected. And a lot of that is just to do with, the industry dynamics, but also just kind of our messaging of how we're approaching it as opposed to how other people are, what their messaging is. So, I think it's really good. As far as an exit, I'm young. I'm not trying to retire in 5 years or anything like that. Our plan is to basically grow this over the next 7 or 8, 9 or 10 years, and then just kind of reassess at that point.
Yep.
Not even to say hey, we're going to sell in 7 years, because I don't think that's what we would do. It's more just we're not going to even really think about that over the next 7 or 8 years, because we don't want it to distract us from what we're trying to accomplish. And we don't want it to get in the way of making the right decisions, I guess. And we know that, if we do the right things along the way, and if we grow and if we build a great team and all of that, the offers will come when we're ready for them, but we're not going to focus on that right now. I think, fast forward 10 years, let's say we have, 50 funeral homes or whatever. I could see us doing a few different things. I could see us bringing in a CEO to replace me, to then either just operate it and have slow and steady growth at that point. Or it could be, hey, take us from 50 to 100 over the next 5 years or 10 years or whatever it may be. And I kind of take some other role. Maybe I'm on the board and I do something else. I could see me just staying there longer. I could see us getting a really, really good offer from some really, really good company that we feel has shared values and alignment from us, and we get acquired by them. What's interesting about funeral homes too is that there's the business side and there's also the real estate side. And so we could basically sell off one or the other or both, depending on what we want to do. And so, there's a ton of options out there that to think about it right now is important, and how we, we just have to know hey, these are different options, but it's also there's enough options that we don't have to decide now. We don't have to just focus on one path, because we have enough options. And I think, today, I think probably what we'll do, if you had to ask me, is just bring it, keep operating it in-house, whether that's me or bringing in someone else to be the CEO. I don't really see us selling it, in 6, 7, 8 years, but never say never, I guess.
No, I mean, things will change and develop as time goes on. It brings up an article that I read this past week. Is one of the bigger guys, KKR, one of these massive private equity funds. They've come to realize that a lot of times their investments that they do, because they're working on a 5-10 year timetable, and
Yeah.
then they're supposed to exit out, return money to investors. They're finding that, hey, this is actually a really good business. We don't want to exit. We want to just
Yeah.
continue to operate. We want to continue to help this business grow. And they're finding that there's some of these businesses that they really just want to hang on to and not sell in order to
Yeah.
return money to investors. The kind of the nice thing about your model and the way you guys are operating is, if this is a good business in 10 years and you're saying, hey, we're at 50 funeral homes and it's still good, maybe we continue to grow it, try to get a little bit bigger, or we just keep it and just improve margins, or whatever the case might be. There's not that pressure to, hey, we
Yeah,
have to exit
exactly.
because our investors want it. So it, it,
Yep.
and I think some of the bigger players are realizing that there's value in hanging on to an asset.
Right. Yeah. So it's nice to have those options. We'll see how it goes.
Well, thanks for kind of walking us through your strategy. Appreciate it. I think listeners will have a good idea of like what you're doing, what your goals are, and how you're going to go about it. Wrapping up here, I
For
wanted
sure.
to ask you any final thoughts or advice that you would share to someone who's maybe an MBA student or been in the workforce for a couple of years and looking to mix things up, or someone who has money and wants to get involved in this space. Any advice you'd want to share to people?
Yeah, if you have money, you can just text Matt. He'll give you my bank account info.
That's right.
Venmo me. Just send it my way. I'll put it to good use in Vegas next time I go. Don't worry about that.
As long as it's not an A7.
Yeah, I've learned not to go in on A7, and as long as I don't do that, money is coming. So, no, I think I would say people underestimate the value of having really good partners, and I think like you always hear about like the fears of partnering with the wrong people, and I think that's definitely true. I've had some of those experiences briefly as well, where it's like, hey, we both like this idea, or we're in a group of 4 of us, and we really want to like look at this thing. And it's like one person gets more excited than the other, and they feel like they're putting in more work, or someone puts in more money, or like, there's just all these dynamics that make it,
can make it
awkward. Yeah. But on the flip side, if you can find the right partners, and if you can figure out from the beginning, like, hey, here's our vision, here's our values, here's what drives us, here's what motivates us, here's what everyone's roles and expectations are, and you can like figure that all ahead of time, and then you go and do it, it's like infinitely better than trying to do it all on your own. At least for me. And I think for a lot of people out there,
I think that's true for most people.
Yeah, just because it's like there's so many ups and downs in entrepreneurship. And if I'm in a down and my partner's, either normal or on an up, he can kind of bring me up, or she can bring me up to like, a level playing field. And so we can balance each other out. And then
it's a bit like marriage.
Yeah, it's kind of what I was going to say. Like, it's kind of like marriage where, you bounce ideas off of each other. Someone can kind of like, if I think I have a really good idea, but it's really not, they can kind of be a good sounding board. I think it really is a case in entrepreneurship where 1 + 1 equals, 3 or 5 or 10 or whatever. It's not 1 + 1 = 2.
Right.
Although if you're with the wrong person, it can be 1 + 1 = 0. So, just make sure that like, figure out who you are, figure out what type of partner you want, and then make sure you're being the type of partner that your partner wants to be with, right, too, so that you don't drive those good people away. Once you found them, found the right person, make sure you do what you can to make sure that everyone's still happy. And so I don't know, I think for me, that's been super, super helpful. Aside from just the business case to be made, it's also nice just to have a friend that you're doing it with. If your partner can be a friend, the power of multiple networks is also super, super helpful. So if you're can partner with somebody who's not from your same background or your same kind of network group, you kind of get you get to tap into that as well, which a lot of times in the beginning of business, it's just like, hey, I know this person and maybe they'll help me because I know them, even though normally they wouldn't.
Right.
And I think it's some of those types of things where it's like, maybe it's luck that feels like it just helps you get there, but it's also just connections and, seeing if you can make things happen with not much in the beginning. So
Yep.
I think that's probably the biggest thing I've learned the last year, is just the value of a really good partnership and how much help that can really be. So
there's an African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And
yeah, for sure.
I think that applies here. I also think you're part of. It reminds me of an episode from The Office where Jim and Daryl are working on their startup, and Jim realizes, hey, I've been a bad roommate. Roommate 101, take care of your stuff, clean up after, clean up the apartment, do the basics to make their life easier too. You're looking for the right partner, but you also want to be the right partner for them as well.
Exactly. And then the other thing I would say is, don't be afraid to have fun along the way. It can be really easy for people who are, entrepreneurs and who are motivated by, most of the things that make people want to be an entrepreneur are people who are, high achievers. Like, they can let their work get in the way of life because they're motivated by kind of not even necessarily the money, but just by like achieving whatever it is. Yeah, whatever problem they're trying to solve, like just solving that problem. And I think if you aren't intentional about taking a break in whatever way that looks like, it could be a vacation, it could be a long weekend, it could be, I know you, Matt and Celeste, you guys are really good about getting outdoors and going on bike rides or hikes or whatever, whatever it is, make sure you do it. And it really will help you, I think, enjoy the journey of the business as well if you're not just always in the business. So don't sabotage yourself by having no fun along the way.
Wise words. Take time to sharpen your saw, as they say in business school.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Robbie, thanks for coming on. This has been awesome. I've learned a lot. Been inspiring hearing your story and seeing the success you've had so far. Hopefully that success translates to next time you go to Vegas as well.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, thanks for having me. It's been good. And, if anyone is curious about search funds, feel free to reach out to me and, I'll do the best I can to help you out.
Awesome. There you have it, people. Well, thanks again, Robbie. We'll talk to you later.
All right. Okay. We'll see ya.
See ya.